Paulie malignaggi for Paulie TV. What's going on? Big night of boxing. Dimitri Bivol retains his WBA light heavyweight world championship with a unanimous decision over Canelo Alvarez. I gotta tell you, if you guys saw my pre-fight prediction for the fight, I had a controversial decision for Canelo Alvarez, aka Bivol getting robbed. The fight pretty much went the way I anticipated it to go. I'll explain to you in a second why. It's just the only difference is I misjudged the judges. For once, I should have trusted the judges, and they got it right. Barely. I mean, I thought it wasn't that close, but still, they gave a unanimous 7 rounds to 5 all across the board for Canelo Alvarez. My question about this fight, my main question was the pace Dimitri Bivol brings. Canelo Alvarez is never comfortable fighting at a bigger pace. And usually what he does is with his sharp counterpunching ability or his big power, he intimidates opponents into fighting his pace of fight, which is a little bit of a diminished pace where then he can pick his spots, take his time, and sort of break you down methodically. But when guys don't respect his pace and when they force him to fight at a different pace, he sort of has not shown the ability to raise his game and pick up the pace. You know, when there's urgency, I've not seen him really raise his game and pick up the pace that much. So my question was going into the fight, you know, Bivol, I feel like is going to have a bigger pace. And how is Canelo either going to intimidate him or and diminish Bivol's pace, or he's going to have to raise his own pace to the level of Bivol's pace? Neither happened, and I'll go back to things I've said in the past. Eastern European fighters are a little bit more tough to deal with and break mentally. I felt like Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant sort of cooperated with Canelo, and that their pace started to diminish little by little to the point where it was at Canelo's pace, and then Canelo was eventually able to stop them and catch them with the shots he needed to catch them with because he was fighting at a comfortable pace. Bivol, to tell you the truth, there was only a couple of moments early in the fight where I was actually giving Canelo credit for trying to start the fight fast. So I felt like he realized Bivol's pace might be a problem. So let's get to Bivol, make him doubt himself, and you may be able to drive and maneuver the fight in a way where it's at a comfortable pace for yourself if you're Canelo. But I tell you what, Bivol showed that he's a hungry fighter, and this is why he's the light heavyweight champion of the world, and why he came in as a light heavyweight champion of the world. He wasn't what I would consider Sergey Kovalev being at the time when Canelo fought him, which was a little bit past it and a little bit mentally checked out. For the most part, Eastern Europeans, in the middle of their career especially, with a lot to prove, guys like Golovkin when he fought Canelo the first time, guys like Bivol now, it's a lot harder to break them mentally. They come from a part of the world where they've gone through a lot, and those people have had to suffer a lot. And usually you bring in somebody like that, and for the most part, you see those guys, they're tougher to break, you know. In the Western Hemisphere, we have typically Mexican fighters are like that. You know, they're usually very tough to break, humble beginnings and whatnot. You know, it was interesting because as I was watching the fight, Bivol did slow down for a couple of middle rounds. I think maybe 2 or 3, one of those rounds, I felt like he distinctly was slowing down, and I thought maybe Canelo's going to take the pace from him early on and make sure that he bosses it. But then Bivol all of a sudden turned it around, round 4, he turned it around, and that was it. I don't think he lost another round. I mean, it was crazy. It was crazy to me. I scored a fight, was it 10-2 or 9-3, something like that. I didn't think it was a very difficult fight to score. I thought the judges were a little bit more lenient towards giving Canelo more rounds, which also was something that I had a criticism for Canelo at about the 3/4 point of the fight, where I was saying there's no urgency in him. You know, this was what happens when a guy has sort of made his legacy. He's won a lot of big fights. He's sort of got a legacy set for himself, carved it out. People calling him maybe the greatest Mexican fighter ever and whatnot, and who knows, maybe he is. But end of the day, there was no urgency. There was not a willingness to bite down and go get it when he was clearly behind. And for me, I was saying that was probably because 30, 40, $50 million paydays, one after another, sort of solidify your bank account. And also, you've won a lot of big fights. You've been in at the top of the game since he's like 19. People have been talking about Canelo Alvarez since he's 19, 20 years old. He fought Floyd Mayweather when he was 21 years old. So he's been in the game for a long time. And maybe you just mentally check out at a certain point and you can't bite down when it gets tough like this anymore. But then I thought about when he lost to Floyd Mayweather. And for Floyd Mayweather, people were saying he was too young. But one thing you have when you're too young is you have that ferocity to not accept the loss. And even in that fight, he kind of mentally checked out when he was behind. So that maybe, I don't, so why am I saying these things? I'm saying these things because I don't know if a rematch would necessarily be what's worth it for him. I don't know if a rematch would necessarily be what's worth it for boxing fans. Canelo has shown a deficiency in a willingness to bite down and go for it when he's behind. Bivol, we know, is not Golovkin in that Golovkin was a sit-on-your-punches type of fighter. So he was never going to be super busy. Bivol is not as hard, probably not as hard of a puncher as Golovkin, but he's a respectable puncher. And he's not always a sit-down-on-his-punches kind of guy. So he can get off more shots, which kind of overwhelms you and puts you behind on the scorecards. So you're going to have to deal with that. You already know if you're Canelo Alvarez that mentally you're not going to be able to break down Bivol and get him to doubt himself and get him to throw less punches. So how do you beat him? Are you going to, for the first time in your career, raise the urgency and throw more punches than is natural to you? I've never seen Canelo Alvarez do that. I don't think he can do that in the rematch either. There's a lot to show in the rematch for Canelo. I think personally he would have been better off saying that and maybe he may change his mind. Who knows? He says he wants the rematch right now, but maybe he may change his mind and saying taking an in-between fight. Canelo Alvarez needs a big change in game plan here. You know, all the sitting down on your shots, these 1 at a time or 2 at a time shots that have been getting the respect of a lot of the opponents, could not get the respect of Dimitri Bivol. And as a matter of fact, he started reacting more. There were shots on the arms that really busted up Callum Smith that he was trying on Dimitri Bivol, and Bivol was blocking them at first. But then at a certain point, Bivol's like, why do I just need to block these? I'm going to start countering him. And every time he took a shot on the arm, he started countering with either a sharp left hook or a jab. So not only did Bivol never relinquish the pace, but he actually started taking more and more control of the pace. And honestly, when we look back at the scorecards, it was 7-5 all across the board. Canelo just needed to show a little bit of urgency and they would have robbed Bivol. Can you imagine that? If he would have showed just a little bit of urgency, even in round 12, go try and win round 12, you would have got a draw. You wouldn't have come home with the world title, but he would have at least been able to rob the fight from Bivol and there would have been a draw. And who knows, you may be talking about a rematch or not about a rematch, who knows. But at the end of the day, this is another lesson in tonight's fight. Every time we have a Canelo Alvarez fight, people keep talking about who Canelo Alvarez should fight. They keep talking about other opponents except the opponent of the week. This week, Oleksandr Usyk's name came up in the conversation about fighting Canelo. Bivol felt very disrespected. You kind of could see that in the way he had his post-fight interview where he said, we can have a rematch, but he's going to give me the respect as the champion. Of course, Bivol had to come out first. He had to be announced first, you know. Probably had to maybe not get as much money as he wanted to. And then during fight week, he has to hear conversations about Oleksandr Usyk when he is the opponent, the undefeated light heavyweight world champion, and the opponent on the night. So I think Dimitri Bivol fought for and got his respect. I think it's back to the drawing board for Canelo Alvarez, and a big change in game plan is needed. I think he's got to really assess in his own mind if he's willing to be uncomfortable to win these fights. And if he's not, I don't think he should be jumping up in weight like this. I think maybe he's better off going back down in weight. Although even at a lower weight class, at super middleweight, you got younger, hungrier fighters like David Benavidez who are going to test the urgency, test your ability to bring out that urgency that we haven't seen you bring out when push comes to shove. Canelo is a great fighter. I really do think he's one of the generation's best. I do not think though that he is the guy like a Floyd Mayweather who clearly dominated his generation. Canelo has been the beneficiary of several close decisions, and tonight he finally was not able to get that close decision, and it didn't go his way. To basically in retrospect, looking back now at this fight, I think Canelo should not go for the rematch. I think he should, you know, take an in-between fight and maybe decide. And maybe that in-between fight is the third Golovkin fight. Who knows? Maybe the third Golovkin fight, an older Golovkin, a Golovkin who looked a little bit shop-worn in the Murata win. Maybe that is the in-between fight he needs before going back to fight Dimitri Bivol. Bivol, a monster win. I think the bigger fight for Bivol, for boxing fans, would be Bivol against the winner of Smith and Beterbiev. Joe Smith may knock out Beterbiev. And listen, both guys, I think Beterbiev is a better fighter, but Joe Smith has the firepower to knock out Beterbiev. So if Joe Smith wins that fight, you know, you can have a unifier against a guy that you've already beaten. But clearly, this is a business and this is prize fighting, and nobody's going to give Dimitri Bivol the kind of money that Canelo Alvarez rematch would bring. I think people would still tune in. I just don't know stylistically what's worth it and if it's going to be any different. I cannot fathom Canelo Alvarez making the proper adjustment in this fight. It's a very difficult adjustment for the style of Canelo. Styles make fights, and it's a very difficult adjustment for the style of Canelo to get busier because he's a sit-down-on-your-punches guy, and he sort of places his shots very, very carefully, and he's very accurate. But against a busy guy, it sort of throws you off. And we saw that with Bivol today. He was good defensively, blocking. He was good offensively in his attack, and he was sharp with his eyes. And he got sharper as the fight wore on by reacting better and better to the shots of Canelo Alvarez, to the point where he was counterpunching almost everything Canelo was throwing. He even started mixing it up to the body, something he wasn't doing early in the fight. So in the fight, really, Dimitri Bivol made all the adjustments, and he got better as the fight wore on, while Canelo didn't make many adjustments and then faded as the fight wore on. Big win for Dimitri Bivol. The WBA light heavyweight world champion remains undefeated, and had tonight carries with himself a bunch of respect that he was not getting prior to this fight. I'm Paulie Malignaggi for Paulie TV.